Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. Kylen, Schulte and Crystal Turner. Was Brian Laundrie involved? What do you think? During research into Brian's reading materials, particularly Annihilation and Lullaby, it started to seem less implausible that Brian wasn't involved in Schulte's and Turner's deaths. This is because both narratives involve a high body count, and Annihilation in particular involves many women dying. True Crime Rocket Science has been fairly silent on the topic, while many other channels have breathlessly expressed the thoughts and feelings of many of you. Could Brian be a bigger monster than we realize? Could he be a serial killer? Before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. Like, share, leave a comment. And let's get started. In true crime, there is often a temptation to believe the worst in a criminal. A criminal isn't simply guilty of his crimes. He has to be all guilty, all bad, all evil. In a 50-50 situation, we tend to not give the criminal the benefit of the doubt. Instead, the opposite. And since the Schulte-Turner homicides remain unsolved, and since there's not been any kind of court case or inquest into what happened to Gabby, there's a sort of open case scenario. There certainly has been for a long time, similar to what we saw in the Chris Watts case. And so within that vacuum of speculation, many YouTubers have come forward and filled it with speculation. True crime audiences love it. It sort of pricks the imagination. Could this be possible? How about that? It's kind of quite sensational. But I've never really put much stake in it. And my unpopular opinion is in keeping with the ambit of this channel: authenticity, fact-based, anchored in evidence. I've always accepted the FBI's position that Brian simply wasn't a factor in the Schulte-Turner homicides. I've always suspected there's a dead simple reason for it: that GPS and cell phone data simply put Gabby and Brian too far from the crime scene. That was my assumption. Well, now it appears this hypothesis was correct. Just a couple of days ago, the FBI made a rare statement on the case, and this was actually a statement that came out before the FBI report. And in that statement, they clearly said that Brian was not involved in the unsolved Moab murder. They went further and they said why. Quote, "Following an investigation, the Grand County Sheriff's Officer narrowed the date of death to August 14th. In other words, that was the day when this couple were killed. And so it's quite simple then. On August 14th, where were Brian and Gabby? If we know the date that this couple were killed, then it's simply a matter of, do they have an alibi or not, right? Where were Brian and Gabby on the 14th, 2 days after the Moab incident? Now, let me ask you, and think about this, try and imagine it's you. Imagine that you were involved in the Moab incident. You were either Brian or Gabby. You were upset. You were confronted by the police. You were almost arrested. Would you want to hang around Moab after that? And bear in mind, they stayed in Moab overnight. And then the question is, on the 13th, what did they do? Now, the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior. And so one's got to look at the itinerary of Gabby and Brian as they were traveling through Utah. So obviously the dates that these images were posted aren't necessarily the dates that they were taken, but they are probably quite close to that. And this is quite an important area, and I'll be dealing with the timeline after Moab in a separate episode. And it really focuses around the time that the only YouTube video was posted. And I think that was on the 19th, was it the 18th or the 19th of August? And if you think about it, that was just 5 months ago. This whole case has started, took place and ended and has been sort of wrapped up within 5 months. And just for some people, they just seem to have moved on already. In any event, the Gabby's Instagram shows that they were in Bryce Canyon National Park on July 22nd, at the Mystic Hot Springs on July 26th, 4 days later, Canyonlands National Park, that's in Utah, July 30th, Mesa Arch, Canyonlands, July 31st. This is sort of the area around where the Moab incident took place. So they were already there July 31st. And so the incident took place 2 weeks later. Was there any reason for them to hang around for a lot longer? The photos of Gabby and Brian were also taken or posted certainly on August 12th. They were possibly taken on August 11th. Although if you read the description that Gabby puts there, she says, on a calm Monday morning, Bizarre Design and I decided to take the highly trafficked hike to the Delicate Arch. And a Monday in that week was actually, I think, the 9th of August. So, especially where you have these long narratives next door, it seems that they'd collected these images, curated them, and put them up in a certain way with a narrative beside it. In some cases, they've added, if that's the word, they've attached a comment to a particular brand, almost to perhaps attract their attention. But there are two ways to look at it. How long did they spend in a place? Bear in mind that they had a lot to still see in their summer epic, and they had to end up, I think, in Oregon in October. So they couldn't spend too long in any place, and they'd already spent about 2 weeks in the Arches National Park. And one of the areas where they may have argued was one of them might have wanted to stay, another one felt they had to leave. The show needs to go on. And so anyway, based on this information, it does look like, just taking that information, does look like, would they still have been in Moab on the 14th, 2 days after the Moab incident? And the answer is, as it turns out, the answer is that they weren't. And so this is also quoting from the FBI investigation. And it's from a letter released by the Grand County Sheriff Stephen White, who said, quote, "The FBI and Florida investigators have determined, based on electronic transmission evidence, that neither Petito nor Laundrie were involved in this case," end quote. So actually what they're saying then, I really don't know why they can't be more clear about what they're saying. What they're actually saying is based on cell phone evidence from Brian and Gabby's phones, right? And it suggests that they have both phones in their possession, which I think is quite an interesting inference. It would also be interesting to know whether Gabby's parents were given her phone back, in terms of the evidence. So it's frustratingly vague, but the electronic transmission evidence very likely refers to cell phone data, more specifically GPS data and pings. If you could place Brian's phone close to the time and place of the Schulte Turner cell phones, that would be inculpatory. But the opposite is also true. I'd be interested to see whether those channels who have been hyping up the anticipation that Brian's also responsible for being the creepy perpetrator behind the Schulte Turner slayings, whether they will acknowledge this update from the FBI indicating otherwise. Even without the cell phone data, a motive never seemed to make sense. Brian's world was Gabby, and he didn't kill Gabby with a gun. This couple died of multiple gunshot wounds. Other than the geographical match and similar timing, it's just a mismatch from start to finish. I do remember one channel suggesting that Brian may have committed double murder because Gabby was becoming friendly with the couple and this made Brian jealous. And this being compared to Gabby going out with Rose and that making Brian jealous and uncomfortable. I don't think it's in the same ballpark. Two young girls going out for a sort of ladies' night is very different to hanging out with a married couple. Anyway, that's my position. From this particular episode, I'd like to take you guys into Lullaby and Annihilation, both books that I've looked into and some of my patrons have studied, and it really adds a fascinating different dimension to the case. I have said before, if we don't get the contents of the notebook, and the whole idea of getting the contents is getting a peek into Brian Laundrie's mind, well, then these books are the next best thing. If there are any fans interested in the Alec Baldwin series, I'm going to be putting up another episode dealing with part 2 of the statements made by the police officers in that particular case. And so we've already dealt with one officer's report with the movie director. We will now deal with the other 10 remaining officers in that case supplemental report. Pretty interesting. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.